Hi, everybody. While you continue to eat, I'd like to start our program. I'm Peter Gurovich. I'm technically at the moment the vice president of the Emeriti Association. The president is actually on a boat, on a cruise. He was supposed to talk to us by the miracle of Zoom, but the miracle of Zoom isn't working because he cannot communicate with us. So I will start out as the vice president and I'll give you his report. And then I will introduce Steve Adler, who will continue the program. And then it'll come back to me because Steve Adler will announce to you the next steps of the association, which is that our president will finish his term and he'll announce the new board, which includes me and Barbara Parker. And then I become the president. And at that point, I get allowed to do that. And then I will continue the program. So let me do the report. And so what Alan McCutcheon was going to do was to give you the report of the Emeriti Association. So let me give you the elements of that. So the three big things that it has been doing, I think, have been the Emeriti Association's mentor program, which sponsors the Chancellor Scholars Program. And this helps, which is an aim at providing first-generation college students 2 years of communication and leadership training, as well as one-to-one mentoring. So some 48 Emeriti faculty and staff serve as mentors to 40 freshmen and 40 second-year mentees. Many mentors continue with their mentees for the entire 4-year undergraduate program. And participation in this program has enriched the experience for mentors as well as mentees. I see several people in the audience who I know have done this, and I talked to mentees, and they are all, I've always heard people express a lot of appreciation for their participation, and I've known that mentors have always liked doing it, and mentees have enjoyed the experience that they get. So I think that's one of the important things that the mentor program that the Emeriti Association has been doing, and it's been growing ever since it started, and it's very valuable. So another thing that the Emeriti Association does is a monthly academic seminar that has been given the past couple of years via Zoom, the miracle of Zoom, and there the miracle of Zoom has actually worked. They are open to all Emeriti members, as well as the current faculty and academics, and to members of the USCSD Retirement Association. And it's one of the fun responsibilities of the vice president, which over the past year was me, and this year is going to be Barbara, is that it's our job to organize this. You look around and you try to get ideas about who to invite to give these, and it's a lot of fun to get to look through on the campus what people might be interesting speakers, and to communicate to everybody what is all the, we know there's a lot of fantastic research going on in the campus, but we know it's a big campus and you might have no idea what kinds of things are going on in other departments. So it's a lot of fun for yourself as well as your colleagues to learn what are the interesting things going on. So we have 8 of those a year, and that's a lot of fun. They used to be live, but now that they are Zoom, we get a lot of people who watch them, and they are taped so that you can see them by connecting to the newsletter of the association and watching them afterwards. And then finally, there is also the Emeriti Association Book Club, which meets once a month. And for the past few years, there's also a meeting because of COVID via Zoom to discuss a book selected by one of the book club members. So the way that works is the member who proposes the book is the person who leads the discussion. And that's an interesting experience. If you've ever done it, that's how I got first involved with the Emeriti Association, as I decided to join it. And I enjoyed it a great deal because your colleagues pick books, and they're likely to be, since it's a very diverse group of people, they're likely to be books outside the ones that you'd likely to pick yourself. And they don't, my experience is that most people do not pick books that are, they don't pick books that are their field. because they know perfectly well that most people won't read the things that are part of their field. They pick the kind of things that they want to read, and they have diverse interests. I enjoy it. I'm a social scientist. I'm a political scientist. I find that most people pick novels, history books, documentary things, very, very interesting books, and the discussions are a lot of fun. So that's also happens once a month. So I think that those are the three biggest programs that the Emeriti Association has been doing, and they've been doing it for a number of years. They're very successful, and I think they've overcome the constraints of COVID by using Zoom. And I know that all of the organizations are now confronting the challenge of what do we do now? Do people want to go back to live? Which some people do want to go back to live. On the other hand, some people are frightened of parking challenges. And so there is debate, and there's a lot of experimentation going on about what to do. Some people are having live meetings as an effort to see how well that's going to work. So that's Alan's. That was the report of our president. That I'm now no longer going to be Alan. I'm now going to turn the microphone over to Steve Adler, who is on Zoom, and he's now going to appear thanks to Vanya. And the miracle of Zoom will now produce Steve Adler on the screen. Is that right? Yes, there we go. Okay.
I hope so.
Steve. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Peter. Hi, everyone. It's my pleasure and honor to be able to make a couple of announcements and present a few awards. And so getting right to it, it's my distinct honor to present our two Dixon Award recipients their awards this year. For those of you who don't know, the Edward Dixon Award was established by a trust provided by UC Regent Edward Dixon. And over 50 years, it has grown from an initial endowment of a little over $200,000 to over $2 million. Dixon stipulated that the earnings from the endowment would both stimulate and recognize emeriti for their continuing service, teaching, and research. In 2003, the Office of the President split the fund 10 ways so that each campus could offer a 1 or 2 awards depending upon the amount in the endowment at that point. And the Emeriti Association solicits nominations, vets the curriculum vitae, solicits letters of reference, and makes a recommendation to the Executive Vice Chancellor's office, who then officially approves the award. This year we have 2 recipients, and they are being honored today as Dixon recipients. The award carries a stipend of $10,000 each, and we honor them for their contributions to the students and faculty, to the community, both large and small, campus-wide, extending to national and international arenas. And both our recipients are old friends, people who have been major figures on our campus for many, many years. And I think that they both truly put the merit back in Emeriti. And so I'm going to present the first award and then the second. So in alphabetical order, the first recipient is Dick Attia. And just a little bit of Dick's background. Dick, who is a native of Brooklyn, New York, but that didn't weigh too heavily into the Emeriti decision-making, I should say. Dick earned his BA from Williams College and his doctorate from Yale, and joined the UCSD Department of Economics in 1967 after stints at Stanford and Yale. And I also noticed that Dick served while in graduate school as a staff economist on President Kennedy's Council of Economic Advisors. during the Kennedy administration, and I would love to have a private sidebar with Dick about his experiences with Jack and Jackie. But moving on, while at UCSD, Dick was chair of economics, and in 1982, he was appointed Dean of Graduate Studies and Research. And then when the office grew, he served as Vice Chancellor for Research and Dean of Grad Studies for 12 years until he retired in 2006. His service to campus and community beyond campus included chairing the GRE board, chairing the Council of Graduate Schools board, and service on the California Biomedical Research Association board. Dick has shown remarkable dedication to both the campus and system-wide Emeriti associations, having served locally as both vice president and president of our own Emeriti Association and chair of the system-wide QCA, the Council of UC Emeriti Associations. He is one of the longest-serving mentors in our Chancellor's Scholars Emeriti Mentors program, which he joined at the inception of the program in 2006. And as Suzanne Chaffee wrote in a letter of support for Dick, his work has had a profound impact on the lives of countless students, colleagues, and the university community, and he embodies the values that this award seeks to celebrate. So my pleasure to pass on the award to Dick and ask Dick to say a few words if you're so inclined.
Well, this is indeed an honor. When I look down the list of previous winners, I say, oh, these were all my good friends, or most of them. And it's been, retirement has proven to be a very rewarding experience, in large part because of CUSBIA and also the UCSD Retirement Association, because of all of the activities that they've had. And I'm glad to see that we're getting back together face to face. I think it's a very more valuable experience than Zooming, although Zoom has many wonderful aspects to it. The thing that I really love about it was getting to be well connected with people in other disciplines that you don't get to when you're working day to day, teaching your classes and doing your research, running your department or whatever. And so that is really a fortunate arrangement we have here. It's such a very successful Emeriti Association. I think we all owe our thanks to Suzanne and Vanya for all the work that they did in making the organization work so well. And I'm very grateful to them both for that. So thank you very much. And I feel honored indeed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dick. It's great to see you even in 2 dimensions, if not 3. Our second recipient is Peter Cowie. Peter has been a presence on local, national, and international political science stages for many years, and his contributions have had a significant impact on UCSD, and certainly has bolstered the campus's reputation in many ways. Peter received his undergraduate degree at Georgetown and his master's and doctorate from Berkeley. He joined UCSD faculty in 1976 and received the Qualcomm Endowed Chair in Communications and Technology Policy in 2003. Peter served as Dean of the School of Global Policy and Strategy, formerly IRPS, from 2002 to 2021, and held many critical roles in national policy-making organizations, including serving as senior counselor for economic and competition policy and branch chief of the International Bureau of the FCC. My one question for Peter is how he fit that on a business card, but he can share that later. He was director of the UC Systems Institute on Global Conflict and Cooperation. He co-chaired President Obama's transition team for trade policy and was senior counselor for the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative. His board memberships are equally impressive, ranging from La Jolla Playhouse to chairing the board for the California Council on Science and Technology. As a former GPS faculty member, I should say, as former GPS faculty member who's now currently an endowed chair holder in urban policy at Harvard, Gordon Hansen, wrote in his letter of endorsement for Peter, through his career as a scholar, campus leader, and government policy expert, Peter Cowie built insights and institutions that put UC San Diego as the center of global efforts to bring rigorous science and technology into the design of sound public policy. As an emeritus faculty member, he continues this mission with equal gusto. Peter would make an outstanding recipient of the Dixon Award. And I think we wholeheartedly concurred. So Peter, congratulations, and please come on up.
Well, it's a great pleasure to receive this award in tandem with Dick Attia, who, after all, was one of the guiding forces for many of us as we built our careers at UCSD. I wanted to offer, I guess, two thoughts. The first was I've been lucky enough over the years to have had a number of opportunities to leave the university to do other things in the world that were quite interesting and attractive. But I always chose to return to the university and to UCSD because I thought that there is something that just can't be matched in living in a community that is built around the spirit of thinking and invention. That is, in a sense, the ultimate thrill and reward. And being an emeritus professor in a community like that is not leaving that journey. It's just simply doing it a different way. And so for me, the emeritus stage of our lives is simply a continuation of that same journey. So that's the first thought. And the second thought is about the notion of service. Now, I'll confess candidly that I've had my quarrels with campus policy, often saying that we should prefer academic senate service to outside community service in evaluating service and promotion and decisions, because I thought that it draws a needless boundary between the university and the outside world in the way that each of us with our unique skills can make a balance of service contributions. For me, that engagement in the broader world is part of the excitement of living the life of the mind of invention and discovery, because it's often an engagement out there that I re-examine and challenge the assumptions that we often build into our nest of life here. And so I hope that in the years to come, we continue to value the idea that we live the life of the mind, we teach with passion, and that community in the broader sense of serving the world around us is part of what informs our community of thought and teaching here. Thanks very much for this honor.
Thank you so much, Peter. And again, congratulations to both Dick and Peter. I can't think of two more worthy recipients for the Dixon Award. Two more quick notes. One award that comes up annually and has done for the last 40 years is a system-wide award called the Constantine Panunzio Award. This is given by the UC system, and it honors two recipients annually, drawn from the 10 campuses. And although we did not have a winner from UCSD this year, because the competition, as you can imagine, is fierce given the potential field of recipients across the 10 campuses, Emeriti ranks. We did propose one of our folks for the Panunzio Award, endorsed by the Executive Vice Chancellor. And although it was not selected as a recipient, the file was stellar. And I just wanted to recognize that we hold in great esteem our colleague Ann Craig, and who has contributed so much to this campus, both during her time as faculty member in political science and as provost of Eleanor Roosevelt College, and especially in retirement relative to this award, given her service as an acting provost, I think at 2 different colleges after she retired, as well as her steadfast devotion and commitment to the Emeriti Association and her leadership of the Chancellor's Scholars and Emeriti Mentor programs. So I think that even though she didn't receive the award, we hold her in very high esteem and are greatly appreciative of all that she has done for us. So I just wanted to make mention of that. And then finally, in the award realm, I wanted to make mention of the fact that our dear friend and colleague Sandy Lakoff has finally decided to pass the baton as editor of our quarterly newsletter, Chronicles, over to me. And Sandy has done, so much for this campus and so much for the Emeriti Association over the years. He is legend. But in this regard, we at the EA wanted to just say thank you to Sandy for his tremendous stewardship over the Chronicles since 2006, when he took over the reins as editor. And big shoes to fill, tough act to follow. I hope I can do it with some honor and dignity. But we have a plaque. I know Sandy isn't here at the luncheon today, but we have a plaque that we're presenting to Sandy that reads, this plaque of recognition is presented to Sandy Lakoff for the generosity of your time and expertise following retirement on behalf of the UCSD Emeriti Association as editor of Chronicles from June 2006 to December 2022. And Sandy, be well, and thank you so much for all that you have done for us. Chronicles is really an impressive publication, and it's largely due to your oversight and stewardship. Okay, my last duty today is to switch hats from chair of the awards committee to chair of the nominating committee, and to report that the nominating committee presented proposed a slate of officers and members at large for election by the Emeriti Association membership. And this slate was affirmed resoundingly by electronic voting. And I am doing this now instead of Alan McCutcheon, who, of course, as Peter noted, can't be joining us today. So I'm doing this in my role as, I think, as past president, which I will soon no longer be past president. I'll be past president, and Alan will be past president. So I'd like to read you the names of our new board, and they are: our new president is Peter Gurevich, vice president is Barbara Parker, secretary treasurer is Gail Liu, past president is Alan McCutcheon, The members at large are Joe Watson, Jean Bernard Minster, Rick Boland, Mark Paddock, Duncan Agnew, David Guss, and on the board ex officio are myself as editor of Chronicles, Suzanne Chaffee as managing editor of Chronicles, Vanya Bailon as director of the Retirement Resource Center, May Brown as chair of the Emeriti Mentor Program, Joel Dimsdale as chair-elect of the system-wide CUSIA, System-Wide Council of Emeriti Associations, Phyllis Mirsky as secretary of CUSIA, Harry Pohl as representative to CUSIA, and Kim Signore-Parr as the Oceanids liaison. And I should also note and thank both Jake Jacoby and Sandy Lakoff, who are cycling off of the executive committee as members for their service as well. So these are your new leaders, and I would like to officially anoint Peter Gurevich as the new president. I had been in touch with the Archbishop of Canterbury, who was supposed to FedEx me some of the holy oil that they used last weekend. It didn't get here yet. So Peter, when it does, I'll spritz some on you. But for now, please accept this cyber gavel, and congratulations, and take it away. And thank you very much, folks.
Thanks very much, Steve. I think the Archbishop misused it last weekend. They used up too much of it. They forgot they had a queen as well as a king, and so they used too much of it. Thanks very much for all that. And I think a large number of the board is here in attendance. At least I saw quite a lot of you here. So thank you very much. And I appreciate the task at hand. And let's move on to the program right away. I think the next point in the in our program is the student presentation on cancer culture. And so I'd like to invite to the podium Daisy Ray Menjivar, Emily Park, and Dylan Tran. You guys are all here, I think. Right?
Technical difficulties, as always.
Okay, while Bonnie's getting that figured out, I guess we'll introduce ourselves. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Dylan Tran. I'm a first-year student at Heart of Ravel College, and I'm majoring in computer science.
Hi, my name is Emily Park. I'm a first-year student in Ravel College, and I'm majoring in computer science.
Hi, my name is Desiree Menjivar. I'm a first year at Ravel College, and I will be majoring in marine biology.
So with that being said, the slides are still not up yet, but I do have a question for the audience. How many people here actually know what cancel culture is or have heard of cancel culture? Okay, so about half the room. That would lead into, would you like me to just present without the slides? Is that all right?
We can try one more minute. Apologies, everyone. There's always Zoom difficulties. Okay, we will be restarting the
we will be rejoining. I am going to go ahead and make Stephen as our host so that this meeting does not end. I will leave the meeting and come right back. All right, is everyone able to see the screen? Can I get a thumbs up, Stephen, if you're able to? Great, perfect. Thank you.
Well, I will continue on with the presentation then. Well, moving on. According to a study done by the Pew Research Center, about 61% of Americans claim to know what cancel culture is. Included in this study were also different percentages as they varied across different groups. The most significant difference between these percentages was between those of age, in which the 18 to 29-year-old age group has a significantly larger percentage of knowledge compared to of cancel culture compared to those of other ages. As age increases, that percentage therefore decreases. This just goes to show how relevant this topic is to our current generation, and which is why we are talking about it today. So cancel culture was said to have first sprouted sometime in 2017. That's when the term was first coined, but it was not used very often. In 2018, we saw some minor usage in the social media website known as Twitter. But in 2020, it really blew up in all forms of media. As you see on that infographic to your right, that is a list of Google searches between 2016 all the way up until 2022. That big spike, or those two big spikes that you see, are during the middle of 2020, in which the term itself was very popular and it was spreading all around social media. That's why it is decreased. So what is cancel culture? The basis of cancel culture is canceling. To cancel someone or something is to stop giving them your support. So what that basically means is usually it happens as a result of some socially unacceptable action that that person or that thing has done to deserve such a title. Some notable examples of that would be like racism, pedophilia, bestiality, of such, those types of things. You can kind of equate it to a modern version of boycotting, in which people stand up to usually, but not exclusively, large influencers and popular celebrities. It's usually spread through online media sources, and which is why it's a modern version of boycotting. The purpose is to hold people accountable of their actions. It's to make sure that no bad deed goes unseen. And this sometimes can work as a double-edged sword, which we'll go further on to in the later slides. But for now, I'm going to pass it on to Desiree, in which she'll talk more in depth.
Thank you. So for the examples I decided to include in our presentation today, I wanted to focus on 3 different applications of what cancel culture can revolve around. My first example revolving around a public figure or celebrity, the second one involving a national/worldwide movement, and the last one occurring on a much smaller/individual scale. So my first example, let's talk about J.K. Rowling. So a quick little bit of background information. J.K. Rowling is most notably known for her very successful Harry Potter franchise. So the beginnings of her controversy lay back in 2019, where Rowling publicly supported a British woman who was fired from her job for publishing transphobic tweets. Now, while Rowling was not the one to post said tweets, she received some backlash for the support, but she wasn't the one who wrote them, so she was pretty much let off. However, in later years, Rowling then took herself to Twitter to write a tweet insinuating that women's rights were in danger. And said quote is, "People who menstruate, I'm sure there used to be a word for those people. Someone help me out. Women? Women?" And because of this, many people insinuated that Rowling was acting transphobic because of her fear of endangerment of women's rights being overpowered by the oncoming slot of trans rights. And because of this, Rowling received lots of backlash from fans and celebrities alike. However, due to her notability as a very wealthy and famous British woman in the UK, despite having all this backlash on her, Rowling still remains a very successful character. However, she receives lots of disappointment from the younger generations. In my second example, I want to talk about the Black Lives Matter movement. So a quick definition of Black Lives Matter movement, it's the general worldwide movement calling for justice towards the Black communities in response to discrimination, racism, and police brutality. So the term was first coined back in 2013 after the death of Trayvon Martin, who was shot and killed by a civilian. The term was to later be used in 2020 after the death of George Floyd, who was killed by police. And the reason why cancel culture is correlated with the Black Lives Matter movement is because of the opposition groups who tend to oppose the purpose of BLM. And the two groups that I have on here are All Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter supporters. So a quick definition for the two. All Lives Matter is the belief that, well, that all lives do matter. And the reason why it gets opposition is because it undermines the meaning of what BLM is, in which we try to advocate for more advantages towards the Black community. And Blue Lives Matter is because we want an increased protection in security for police officers when they're on and off duty. And the cancel culture revolves here is because since the two groups tend to have different social values, we get both groups trying to pick at each other in terms of canceling each other for their messages. So for example, Black Lives Matter movement people would consider these two opposition groups to be, for example, racist and white supremacists, whereas vice versa, these two groups would be canceling Black Lives Matter movement supporters because they would consider the messages of BLM to be considered radical leftist propaganda. And for my last example, I want to talk about on a much smaller scale. So the image I have here included came from a news article from the New York Times, in which I have the story here. So the story goes back to a 15-year-old white girl who was caught on film saying the N-word. And this video ended up being circulated around her high school. It never really went out to like public media. However, a student from her same high school ended up keeping the video, and he kept the video for so long. This was during their freshman year. So he kept the video until their senior year when college acceptances started coming out. So what this individual did is that he sent that video of the girl saying the N-word to her dream college. And as a result of that one is when the video became very viral around the country. She ended up receiving lots of backlash, lots of hate comments, to the point where she was even getting death threats. And because of this, ultimately, she had to withdraw from her school because she couldn't handle the pressure. And basically, this example that I wanted to include was to show you that no matter how old media can be, if you are caught doing something on film, whether it's pictures, video, or even an audio recording, if you're caught doing something that's considered socially unacceptable to the general public, that there is a very big chance that you may receive lots of consequences. And it's not just short-term consequences, it may range from long-term. So for example, in terms of further reading the article, it turns out the girl ended up having to drop out of school to go to a community college. Whereas this girl had her dreams of becoming a national cheerleader. Ultimately, her dreams are cut short because of this unfortunate video that was posted about her. But next, I'll be talking about impacts, and I'll pass it on to Emily.
There are various pros and cons associated with cancel culture. Cancel culture, when used in an effective manner, can produce various benefits. For example, when the justice system fails to hold criminals and abusers accountable for their words and actions, cancel culture gives victims an opportunity to speak out against the oppression that they have faced. Cancel culture can also play a significant role in the civil justice movement, because it can be used to hold those in positions accountable for any words or actions on their end that might hinder progress from being made in the social justice movement. However, when cancel culture isn't used appropriately, it could have detrimental impacts. Those who are directly victimized by cancel culture may begin to experience negative impacts on their mental and emotional health, and they may begin to suffer from symptoms including anxiety, depression, trauma, and even suffer from criticism or suicidal thoughts. Victims of cancel culture may begin to experience difficulty with simply going outside, and they can begin to feel out of place in society. The victims may also be fearful for their own safety, especially if invasion of privacy occurs or if criminal threats are being made against them. The victims could also potentially already be experiencing difficulties with their own mental and emotional health, and therefore being canceled would only add on to their feelings of isolation. And furthermore, their reputations could be permanently damaged. Cancel culture can also backfire in the sense that rather than encouraging victims to develop a sense of responsibility for their own words and actions, cancel culture often revolves around public entertainment, especially with the accessibility nowadays of news channels and social media. Even if victims of cancel culture were to genuinely feel remorseful for their actions and choose to apologize, their apologies often wouldn't be accepted by the public. And in this sense, a meaningful debate is unable to take place as unpopular views are simply just pushed aside rather than thoroughly discussed. Overall, while cancel culture has increased the proportion of influencers who have been called out for their wrongdoings, it can still be made more effective by ensuring that its focus is on accountability rather than shame. As seen in the chart included in this slide provided by the Pew Research Center, many US adults and partisans are likely to have a disrespectful attitude towards those who are being canceled. In order for the overall impact of cancel culture to be made more effective, it's important that influencers and those in prominent positions receive constructive feedback on their words and actions rather than harsh and unnecessary punishment. And that will conclude our presentation. Thank you all for listening. We will now open it up to any questions. Oh, yes.
Who was the first person or the first journalist who ever introduced them to the cancel culture?
The term was first used, it was said to have been spotted in an actual post by a person. It wasn't actually a journalist, but they just used the term cancel in a way that inferred not supporting someone rather than using it in the normal sense, which you would use cancel. So it was a post back in 2017, I believe. It was included in the website. I'm sorry, I don't exactly know who sent the post out, but yeah.
Why did you pick this topic?
We were told to pick a topic that was relevant to our generation. And out of the list of topics, I believe this one seemed the most interesting. And yeah, I believe we also have a lot more I guess, experience with this topic as it's something that's really prominent in our generation, more exclusively the online generation in which we see it every day. And it's something that's definitely affected us in more than one way.
Last question.
Mr.
I can understand how boring like
So the idea behind it is that the Black Lives Matter movement has other opposition groups known as the Blue Lives Matter. I'm sure you've also heard of White Lives Matter as well. So cancel culture is not exclusively towards the group that is in the majority. Most of the time, more times than often, there are still minorities that are opting to cancel against others. So the canceling that's happening is in between different groups itself. So Black Lives Matter supporters would be trying to cancel Blue Lives Matter or All Lives Matter supporters, while All Lives Matters and Blue Lives Matters are trying to cancel Black Lives Matter itself. So while they might be a minority, they're still attempting to cancel and they're promoting the culture that encourages it.
Thank you so much.
Okay. My pleasure now to introduce our featured speaker for the program this afternoon. It's my colleague in political science, Thad Cowser, familiar perhaps to some of you because you often hear his name on the radio if you listen to noontime PBS. Maureen Cavanaugh has discovered that, and sometimes you see him in the news in the evening since the local media has discovered him and calls him often for opinion and thoughts on things. That's why he has a sprained leg there. It's a cancel culture that's trying to do things in his opinion. That's not the truth at all. Completely false. False information, false news, just given conveyed to you. But that is quite a well-known person in our community because he's a political scientist who recently chairman of the political science department, currently co-chair of the Agriculture Center on our campus. And he has become a quite known expert, in particular on California and local politics and local government. And he has lived in Australia, has done work there, and has done quite a variety, published in all the most well-known political science journals, not only here, but in France and other places. And so has written quite a lot on political processes, political decision making in Washington, but as I say, emphasize as well in California, which that's not a very common field. Actually, surprise you that state level government is not extremely deeply well known. I'd say that I may be wrong. You correct me. It's your field, but we're very lucky to have that in our community and on our campus. So it's my pleasure to introduce that, to talk about this to us today, the future of politics in America, on which there are news every single day. That my pleasure. Really, thank you.
Well, thanks so much, Peter. I always enjoy our political conversations, and I'm going to enjoy the conversation that I'll have with all of you because, you know, as Peter Cowie was saying, Emeriti faculty are just faculty who have fewer meetings to go to. So I know that you're still going to be very engaged and active in this. I want to talk today about American democracy. Thanks so much, Peter. And American democracy used to be something that we could all take for granted, right? We would look down from our city on the hill at the rest of the world and ask whether their democracies would survive. We'd send our election observers out to elections to see if they were free and fair and stable. But really the last several years, I think, have punctured our sense of self-satisfaction and that sense that American democracy will necessarily be stable, and we don't have to worry about democratic erosion on our shores. We've seen changes in the world, and academics have chronicled that, including many people at UC San Diego. So Barb Walters, her book, How Civil Wars Start, talks about the potential for civil wars in the United States, not a battlefield with blue and gray, but sort of skirmishes resembling the troubles in Northern Ireland that could spread around the country, especially after critical elections. And in many ways, we've seen troubling signs that something like the troubles are upon us. So January 6th was the most obvious example of this, but even after the relatively calm and non-controversial 2022 elections, we had, for instance, a losing candidate in New Mexico who paid 4 men to shoot up the houses of 2 county supervisors and 2 state legislators. And we see election officials across the country facing threats that these formerly obscure bureaucrats never had to worry about. So in a study done by the Democracy Forum last year, found that 1 in 4 election officials. So these are like the county registrars, the elections clerks, usually civil servants who are just in charge of printing up ballots and making sure that the polls are open to everyone. 1 in 4 has faced threats. And if you get to the big cities, that's 2/3 of these election officials facing threats. At a recent conference of secretaries of state, one arrived with her own security detail, another was having surveillance cameras installed in their home, and all across the country, we've seen the FBI arresting people for threatening elections officials. So one of the things that we've tried to do at UC San Diego is work directly with these people who are the front lines of democracy, these nonpartisan election officials in states across the country who are in charge of running elections, but now have this second duty added to their really demanding job. And that second duty is essentially convincing people to trust American elections. Because if our democracy is going to erode, it's because people are not going to see elections as free and fair, and they're not going to be sure that their vote will be counted correctly or the votes of others will be counted correctly. And so what I want to share with you today are the results from some studies that I've done with a team of scholars. So Jen Gadet and Mac Lockhart are fabulous grad students here at UCSD. Seth Hill is my colleague, and Mindy Romero runs the Center for Inclusive Democracy at USC. And what we've been doing is partnering with elections officials to find out what they want to know about the public that they serve, what they trust, whether they trust elections, what they do and don't trust about elections, where the concerns are among voters. And then we want to be looking at potential sources of democratic resilience, solutions to this problem of a lack of trust in elections. What is it that's going to actually restore trust in elections, especially on a bipartisan basis, that could help put our democracy back on firmer ground? So this project is part of a long-term trying to advance this. Maybe this will work. All right. If someone might help me advance any of these slides. Let's see. Oh, there we go. Now I'm free. Okay, excellent. So this is part of a long-term project that I've been working on with scholars across the University of California system, where we were working on looking at voter reforms in California and what their impact was. And then we had surveys that were about to go out into the field in the spring of 2020, just when our elections were massively upended by the COVID-19 pandemic. And that pandemic left Americans of all partisan stripes with a lot of questions about elections, right? Because we had to change from voting primarily in person as a nation to voting by mail. This is something that Californians have been familiar with for a long time, but across the country in many places, and voters in places like Oregon, Washington, Colorado, Nevada had been doing it, but in much of the nation's eastern seaboard, and in particular in many of the battleground states, we hadn't been voting by mail. So this was a new process that people had legitimate questions about. And we did a series of polls during the course of that election. And what they showed was in April of 2020, there was really hardly any partisan split over voting support for voting by mail and whether people wanted to cast a ballot by mail. And that split really changed. We did a series of 4 polls, and what happened was we just saw whenever Donald Trump would talk about voting by mail as a source of election fraud, we would see that gap between Republicans and Democrats go further and further to being more than 20 percentage points at the end of the election. So what we really saw was leaders in one party raising questions about a new way of voting, and voters not having answers to those questions, and thus relying on the leaders that they trusted, right? Which is an understandable reaction of human nature. And this culminated with, after the 2020 election, the long and ongoing accusations, completely unfounded, right? But made over and over again by Donald Trump and many Republican allies who've gone along with that. And that has led to this gap in trust between the parties. And that gap in trust between the parties is actually very different than the gap in trust in elections that we had on the eve of the 2020 election. So where were we going into the 2020 election in trusting elections in America? So this is a question. Let me see if I can minimize or move this Zoom. This Zoom screen so that you can see the top of this. Sorry. If anyone could give me a little hand in just moving this out of the way. But the title of this, thanks very much. This is a question that says, do you trust the US democratic system in general? This is data. Hey, thanks so much. Generally speaking, how much do you trust the United States election system? This is data not from our study, but from a polling group called the Morning Consult that has been doing a long-term time series on this. And where were we on the eve of 2020? We were at a time when 65% of Republicans trusted elections, but only 48% of Democrats and 44% of independents, who are the Republicans in red, Democrats in blue, independents in green line. Right? Democrats, what were they worried about? It was about Russian influence in the 2016 elections. Democrats became less trusting. And so you see this, about 18% gap between the two parties, 17% gap between the two parties in trust in elections. And that flips overnight after the 2020 election and the claims by Donald Trump about how you shouldn't trust them. And so Republicans become the group that doesn't trust elections. Democrats become the group that does trust elections. It becomes an article of faith now in the Democratic Party. One of the things that divides the two parties, and independents are down where Republicans are. So that's when our surveys, when our current series of surveys started, which is in which we feel that after the midterm elections were called in November of 2022. When we were looking at this, the question was, would this non-controversial election that seemed to go smoothly without major controversies, was that going to restore trust in American elections? And the headline that we were seeing, and you may have seen in some other surveys, was yes, trust in election was restored because the overall aggregate level of trust averaged across all Americans rose after the 2022 election. What we found from our national survey of more than 3,000 Americans that we designed in collaboration with the elections directors of Texas, Colorado, Georgia, and the registrar in Los Angeles County, what we found was this: trust in election rose for Democrats by about 20 percentage points, rose significantly for independents, but for Republicans, if anything, it fell. So overall, trust rebounded, but the gap between the parties now is larger than it's ever been since we've been polling on this question. If you go specifically to the question of, do you trust that the 2022 midterm results accurately reflected the vote, or do you think there's significant fraud? Overall, right, the public by an almost 3-to-1 margin agrees that these were accurate results. But among Democrats, that's 85-8. Among Republicans, more people, 43%, say that these results are based on significant fraud than 39% who agree that they accurately reflect the vote. So there are two different visions of reality. And trust in elections now looks like any other really controversial policy issue that divides the parties, like abortion rights, right? It is now one of the dividing lines in our polarized America, at least for the present. Although what these results show to you is that election results are a big determinant of trust. We have this thing called the winner effect. It's true in America in the last 50 years. It's true in nearly every other democracy, which is when your side wins an election, you become more trusting in elections, right? And so for many, one of the questions is, well, if the Republican Party wins the next election, will that trust rebound? Or has there been so much groundwork laid by accusations of mistrust that we won't see that winner effect? All right. There's a clear divide along partisan lines with independents in the middle between the parties. And there's some other divides that emerge. One divide that isn't there is based on gender. There's no gender gap in trust in elections. There's a gender gap in just about everything else in American politics. By about 5 to 10 percentage points, there's no gender gap in trust in elections. There is a gap on racial and ethnic grounds, with white Americans being the least trusting group of elections, but very similar to that is the Latino community in the nation as a whole. Black voters, and you can't see this, but 74% of Asian American voters trust elections. So there is a racial component, and I'm going to be working with graduate students in our program this summer, and including, so we have a summer program that we bring students from Spelman and Morehouse College. And so we're going to have one Morehouse student, one former Spelman student who's now in our PhD program, and another graduate student in our program. And we're going to be exploring the racial and ethnic component to trust in elections in America. One of the other gaps, and the one that is most predictive in elections is education. Right. So if you look at people who haven't advanced past high school, 43% have trust elections, 26% say there's fraud. And at every other level, once you get to high school or some college, it bumps up by another 10 or 15 percentage points, bumps up another 10 for college graduates. And then people like you, people with the higher degrees, 74% trust elections. And so this is correlated with other divides in American society, but it also raises the question of perhaps what we really need, perhaps the antidote to mistrust is education. Perhaps what we need to do is fill in the blanks, some of those question marks that I showed you on that first graph, some of these just concerns about just the lack of knowledge about how elections work, right? Until the 2020 Bush v. Gore election, did any of you know that Chads could hang? Did any of you know what a Harris vote-o-matic was? Right? I didn't, right? And until this election, I didn't pay much attention to Dominion voting machines and how they operated and how secure they were. And so this opens up an opportunity to give voters information, to then see whether they can take that information and use it to decide for themselves whether they want to trust elections and whether they put up partisan screens to that, right? It could be possible that everyone would change when you get more information. It could be possible that no one will change their mind when exposed to information, or it could be that only people whose partisan worldview is open to it may increase their trust, right? There's a lot of evidence in other realms of what we call motivated reasoning, that when you give the same set of facts to people in two parties, people interpret them through the lens of their party. They believe what they want to believe based on their ideological priors. And if that's the case, then educating people and giving them more information about elections should only increase trust among Democrats and perhaps in left-leaning independents, but not among Republicans. So those are potential limits that we know from other studies in political science on the possibility of sort of educating people towards trust. Before I get to the experiment about how we did that, I want to just show you a few other findings from our survey. What do people distrust about elections? So if you look at, it's really the Republicans who are worried about trust in elections. So let's look down that middle column. And what you see is a few key areas right in the middle there that about half of Republicans and about a third of independents mistrust, right? People are worried about ballots cast by mail. That's been the focus of a lot of what Donald Trump and his allies have talked about. And in some ways, that's what that's what's most new in the post-COVID world, is this increased use in voting by mail. People are worried that ineligible voters, whether ineligible voters are actually stopped from casting ballots. This is the concern you see over and over again. When we ask about this in open-ended questions, people are saying, folks who shouldn't be voting are voting. That's tied up a lot, frankly, in people's views on illegal immigration and what's happening in the United States and changes to what people view as traditional demographics of the United States. Right. And it's clearly a flashpoint of concern for Republicans. And also they're worried that people are casting more than one ballot, right? That this sort of old school version of vote fraud, of voting early and often, doing something which is, both, it's like the worst paying felony in American society, right? Hardly, as lots of political science evidence shows, your chances of being pivotal are infinitesimally small in any election. And yet it's a felony to vote more than once. Why would you do it? We have lots of evidence that it doesn't happen very often, but more than about half of Republicans are concerned that it's happening. The thing that most concerns Democrats is worrying that eligible voters face obstacles to actually registering and casting their ballots. So they're worried about voting rights, but Republicans are even more concerned. So essentially, Republicans are concerned about just about everything, and Democrats about just about nothing, and it's really mail ballot voting and people casting multiple ballots. That's the big area of worry. Another thing, and this came from the suggestion of one of our state elections directors who said, people trust elections in my state. What they don't trust is what's going on in another state. One of the distinctive features of the American election system is we don't have a national election commission that runs everything in a uniform way across the country, as many other nations do. Constitution gives state legislatures authority over the time, place, and manner of elections. States often then devolve power to local governments that run elections in very different ways. What else does the American system of federalism lead to? Well, we've also seen over the last decade, especially, red states moving in one way with policies, blue states moving in another way with policies. And so as these states diverge in both their traditional policies and in their election laws, why would we expect anyone from a place like California to trust the way that Texas runs their elections? Why would we expect Texans to trust the way Californians run their elections? These states are moving in different directions. Their governors are always, having Twitter wars with each other. And so it's kind of natural that people wouldn't trust elections in other states. So what we found was that for each partisan group, right, even though they're starting at different baselines, the level of trust in other states is about 20 percentage points lower than the level of trust for how elections run in your own states, right? 63% of Republicans actually trust their own state's elections, but only 41% trust it in another state. People similarly are pretty confident their own ballot will be counted out. What they're worried about is other people's ballots. They will be cast but won't be counted, or they'll be allowing people who shouldn't be voting to vote. Now that doesn't stop people from turning out. Supermajority of people who distrust elections, some or a lot, actually do turn out to vote. And I think that's because they think that their vote will be cast and they want it to count against the other votes potentially fraudulent that they think are coming into the system. It's lower than the turnout rate among people who trust elections a lot, but it's still far above zero. So even though people are worried about the system, they're still participating in it. And that may show that there really is kind of a wellspring of support for elections in America. People are still taking part in them. People haven't abandoned them. Democracy is still a broadly participatory activity. And it shows again that there is the potential to restore that trust. So before I open it up for questions, I want to talk about a series of experiments we did both in this national survey and then also in samples of between 12 and 1,400 individuals that we polled in each of the states where we partnered with an elections official. So what we wanted to do was, we spent the summer talking to these election officials about what they're doing. And they said they're producing videos where they're trying to invite everyone they can into their elections office to show them how elections work. And they're creating videos where they're taking tours of their elections office, walking people around the floor and saying, look, these are voting machines. They're not connected to the internet. Look, no cords, right? They're explaining how post-election audits work. They're explaining the signature verification checks that secure vote by mail ballots. They're giving people the under the hood view of American elections in order to fill an information gap that other people will be filling on social media. Some of their ads take different approaches. They bring bipartisan messaging where they bring, I'm a Secretary of State, I'm a Democrat, the past Secretary of State was a Republican. We're both going to say you can trust elections. Some of them have just show you and introduce you to who these registrars and county clerks are all across the state. There's one from Virginia called Democracy Defended that shows, the flag waving and it plays patriotic music. And it just shows you pictures of all these elections clerks, getting into their pickup trucks, going through their white picket fences into their houses to show that they're normal people. And so either through these kind of emotional messages, election officials are just like us and you can trust them, or these informational messages, here's how everything works and that's why you can trust it. Election officials were putting significant efforts into getting people to try to trust the 2022 election messages. So what we do is we ran something called a survey experiment. We had samples of this size in each of these states. And what we would do essentially is this. We'll show people, a third of the people randomly selected will get to see something like Democracy Defended, that Virginia ad. Let me see if I can even play it. Oh, wow.
The founding story of this great country is also the story of Virginia, because the American ideals we cherish today were born right here. So democracy is more than just our way of life.
So that is a slick, well done ad by a professional media company. What was going on in Maricopa County, which became the sort of ground zero for election controversies in 2022, was actually what we see much more typically, which is kind of a charmingly amateurish video to just give the information.
In Arizona, voters use paper ballots to cast their votes. The tabulators are the machines that the Maricopa County Election Department.
All right, so that's kind of the informational message. The first one was the emotional message. And a third of the people randomly selected on our survey watch Arizona. A third of them randomly selected watch Virginia. And a third of them randomly selected watch Jake from State Farm. And so the idea then is you can compare the levels of trust when we ask people about trust after those surveys, after watching those ads, and see whether, and if you see different levels of trust after they've been given these messages, we know that it was due to the exposure to that advertisement. We can say, here's a causal effect of this. And we can say, look, if we can show this, this can provide rigorous evidence that this public information campaign can help restore trust in elections. And it's evidence that then these election officials can use and take back to their state legislatures and their governors to say, hey, let's invest in more of this in the 2024 election cycle. What did we find? I'm going to show you sort of the estimated effects of each of these on, we asked a couple questions about specific types of fraud, but our two key questions are the ones in the middle about, do you trust elections in your own state more? How much do you trust elections in your own state? And how much do you trust elections in other states? Our national audience was watching these ads about other states, so we expect change in trust in other states. And then I'll show you a second experiment where we provide in-state messages, information, to Texans about Texan elections, and we see whether that affects trust in their own state. So what did we see? We saw. Okay. There we go. If you look at the Virginia ad on the left, the Arizona ad on the right, if you look at that third line, how much do you trust other states' elections? You see significant increases in trust. So these are about 2 to 3 percentage points in the change in the number of people who said they trusted elections, some or a lot, after watching each of these. And they became more trusting that officials do not engage in vote fraud. Didn't change what people thought about other states, but it wasn't designed to, didn't about their own state, but it was designed to increase trust in other states. And in each state, we did work with state officials to determine what were some messages in your own state. And I'll give you the short answer, which is in each of these states, we found at least one of the messages led people to trust their own state's elections. Didn't change their trust in other states' elections, but learning about your own state's elections and those protections led to an increase in trust. These state effects were much larger, 6 to 13 percentage points, just from watching a single ad. And the most encouraging thing about our findings was, remember that question I'd set up before about, can this actually break through partisan blinders, right? Or is it just going to be Democrats who respond? What we found in each and every state, as well as in our national sample, is equivalent effects between the two parties and among independents. So basically, everyone rose together. It was what we call persuasion and parallel, right? Even though Republicans, didn't catch up to the levels of trust for Democrats after watching just one ad, they moved up and became more trusting in just the same way the Democrats would do. Showing, I think, that people are open to being educated and learning more. The other thing that we found is, and it's not quite as rigorous because there are a lot of differences between these ads, but in general, the ads that were most focused on informational efforts, informational approaches, more compelling than the ones focused on just emotions or saying just believe us. So it's really, as you told voters more about elections, they become more trusting regardless of party. So where does this leave us? Well, we've been at UCSD as part of a group of faculty across different schools and departments. So we have our group at the Yankelovich Center doing this research, very closely tied to a new initiative called the Future of Democracy Initiative, which is based out of the IGCC that Peter used to lead, and it's led by a political scientist, Christina Snyder, in our department, and a political scientist, Emily Hafner-Burton, at the School of GPS. We worked together to host a national conference of election officials, scholars, and nonprofit leaders looking at defending democracy on our campus. We shared this with there are 4 secretaries of states in attendance. We share these results with them, as well as elections directors. They're taking it back to their national meetings. The partners who in Texas took this to their office, using it as potential justification for more funding. So we're trying to put rigorous data in the hands of the people at the front lines of democracy. And we're trying to then learn from these findings, as well as the election official partners in trying to attack that question of getting people to trust elections in other states. Because when we get to 2024, Californians, what's going to matter is whether we trust the results in Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. And it's going to matter whether Texans trust those battleground states. And our states are probably not going to have nail-bitingly close elections. It's those purple states where we need to learn about their elections and we need to trust their elections. And so what we're doing is a second round of studies that we're going to put into the field in a couple of weeks that are designed to see whether ads about California elections can cause Texans and Georgians to trust even our blue states elections, and whether information about Texas elections can cause Californians and Coloradans to trust those red state elections, and nationally, whether people put up, whether people's party ID changes their trust in another state's types of elections. So that's what we're working on all across UCSD, and I'm looking forward to our conversation about it. All right, Barbara.
Level of trust if you do the survey on election officials?
Oh, do they not trust each other?
Do they trust themselves and
Yeah.
their group? Do they trust others? Can you just repeat the question?
Okay, great. So Barbara Parker's question, which is, what is the level of trust among election officials in results? So we did not survey them systematically. So I'm going to just talk from the conversations I've had with them. So very few. Every election official sort of knows this fundamental reality that I think most people like working elections have not learned about, which is there's always something that goes wrong. It's always a logistical innocent error, but there are always some problems, right? At UCSD, our polling places had 3-hour lines on election day. Like there's always some issue, right? But they all know, and they have trust in each other, that they are all doing their best, resolving those. There are systems in place to guarantee that anyone standing in line gets the right to vote. There's systems in place to make sure that if your ballots, if you didn't get a paper ballot that was read by a machine in Maricopa County, you're allowed to catch it. So they have a lot of trust in those safeguards of those systems to catch and rectify any of those innocent mistakes. That's the case among sort of long-term professionals in this. One of the most worrying things that we're starting to see emerging is some registrars. And remember, when we run these things by county, we're talking a lot of people who, maybe have high school educations, who don't have a lot of resources, who haven't undergone as much training as they would like running elections in a certain county. So one, Tina Peters, the elections director, the elections clerk of Mesa County, Colorado, was just indicted on 10 counts by a grand jury for essentially for opening up her Dominion voting machine to election conspiracy theorists, posting that password, allowing the passwords to become posted online. So this sort of internal attack, right, is a worry. Election officials that I talked to are less worried about that happening among election officials themselves as they are by the politicians who oversee them. County boards of supervisors. So there are 3 counties in Colorado that now have boards of supervisors who wanted to move to hand counting of election results, which is very inefficient and can often be much less accurate than machine counting. The County Board of Sups wants to do this in Shasta County, California, over the objections of their election clerk. And so their concern is that as questioning the results of the 2020 election becomes a litmus test for moving into office in the Republican Party in some areas of the country, people are worried. Those election officials are worried that at the county level and at the state level, they may be overridden by political actors who don't trust elections or find it strategically useful to question elections. Great question. Yeah.
So do you think the Fox Dominion case, the fact that Dominion one would affect people's trust in those machines that you think will have an effect?
Yeah. So I think clearly it will create a liability concern for major news media organizations before Fox or another major news organization would sort of give a green light to a long-term series of news stories not based in fact, that I think it effectively wards that off. But that's not how people are getting their information about, especially about a lot of these, right? They're happening in smaller social media communities and in media organizations that don't have the same liability concerns. And so I think we're still going to see stories, and those stories are still going to be amplified on social media. You can't censor those. You can't effectively get them out there. What you can do is inoculate people against them with good information, right? I think is what most people think. We were considering, one of my ideas was, why don't we just do an experiment where we expose some people to Tucker Carlson's tweets or Sidney Powell's tweets about saying, or Sidney Powell's court cases where she was saying like, no reasonable person would have believed me. And I think that's not like what we kind of decided at the end of the day against that, because what we want to do is put sort of news you can use in the hands of election officials. And I don't think any of them are going to have a public information campaign based on that, but it might have had some effect. And Peter, feel free to pull the hook on me whenever we get close to 2 o'clock. Okay. All right. Yes, sir.
In one of the posts students showed, young people voting and you say that also higher education.
Yeah. So voting, I'll have to go check out that poster. So turnout rates among young voters, well, always lower than people in 65 plus or in 45 to 64 category. It's always lower. It fluctuates radically between elections and based on sort of local conditions and whether people can convince them that what's going on really matters in their lives. So presidential elections have relatively high turnout among young voters, and we saw that in 2020 with this high turnout across the board, including with young voters in San Diego. So like at UC San Diego, there's a really nice study. There's a group at Tufts University that does basically turnout across each college campus everywhere in the country, and they do reports on these. In 2014, we had one of the lowest turnouts across the country. In 2018, UCSD had among the highest, over 70% turnout of UCSD students in that election. And what was going on? Well, you had a battleground congressional district, Mike Levin's 49, that was in this area, and they hired lots of students to work for him, and they convinced students that there were stakes in this election, right? And so I think that shows in many ways, right, that young voters, whether they're in college or not, right, are going to turn out when they see an election mattering for them and when they feel like they have a pivotal voice in that. And so I think that will lead to this important form of turnout. Yeah, Peter.
Maybe on Zoom.
Oh yeah, great question. There's something in the chat. Okay. Oh, that was.
I'll ask the question while you're looking.
Mhm.
The way to the last question is that a lot of the questions we were asking what people's belief in the election seem to have no particular content of the issues connected to them. But your answer to the previous question immediately went to when people felt they had a stake. Participation went high up. When you raise the question of the state, it relates to the contents. It's related to history somehow. I don't know what your thoughts are on that. To what extent the trust is a substitute. I'm always confused by trust, because trust as a word doesn't say anything about content. It's the lack of trust has to do with your opinion of content. And if you phrase the question in terms of what people think about the state, how does that affect the sense of trust?
Yeah, I think, a kind of larger version of this. So I think, what I heard in the question was, I was talking about the stakes of an election, policy stakes of an election being the key to turnout among young voters. But policy stakes were not, it was not the basis of trust in elections. And I think these are sort of two different phenomena, right? Turnout and engagement is one thing and trust is another. Now, they happen to be correlated, but not all that strongly, right? And that data that I showed that that 66% of people who say they don't trust elections still turn out to vote in them shows that, shows the limits of trust as something that will perfectly predict behavior, right? And so one of the questions that, when I've been talking to other people, whether they're scholars or sort of normal people about what I'm working on now, right? We're not normal people, many dimensions, but but it's good. Okay, well, so what does trust matter? Why are we doing this? Why is it important? And one of the answers is, well, we're doing in our new set of surveys sort of a whole set of questions to look at other behaviors that, if you trust, after you watch one of these campaign advertisements, are you more likely to sign up to work as a poll worker? Are you more likely to, expect your candidates in your party to sign a pledge to accept the results no matter what the outcome, right? Are you going to hold people accountable for these things? Are you, I'd be interested to see what people's thoughts are on how January 6th, people convicted in January 6th, how strongly they should be punished. So I think it could lead to a whole set of other behaviors or attitudes that even if you're not directly, participating or not participating in elections, you are engaging in the sort of shared set of beliefs and shared set of behaviors that we need to have to sustain democracy, right? Where we have to say, well, we're going to punish those who fall outside its bound. We're going to help administer democracy by serving as poll workers, and we're going to expect that the losers consent to elections even if they lost. Like that full suite of opinions and behaviors, I think, is what's going to be sort of sustaining for democracy in the long term. Tim.
Can the fact that you've identified being misused say, I'm going to increase trust even though I'm doing something that's kind of nefarious or kind of undermine trust, bringing in cyber ninjas or whatever, saying, putting out a commercial that wraps it all in flags. It's wonderful. Is that the mechanism? The mechanism that kind of flags and the big offenses, or is the mechanism real information?
Yeah, I mean, so we're trying to be really rigorous about this, and there's no perfect way to have. What you'd like to have is like two advertisements that were alike in all ways, except one of them provided information, the other affected emotions, right? And it's really hard to do that. There are other differences between them, but our sort of, what we seem to show is that in general, those informational messages are more effective than the trust elections. But the example you raised, right, of cyber ninjas. So this was a post-election audit firm, an audit commissioned by the Arizona State Legislature by a group that had no expertise in auditing, that did things in a completely biased way, and still, by the way, showed that their elections were in fact won by the candidates who were declared to have won them. So you could show information that could, you could have an official source. I think what it does show is an official source could indeed provide information, and that information will affect people's attitudes. I think where we are now, and so that can open up the door to sort of misplaced trust, right? But I think where we are now is we know that there's a vast amount of information out that's completely wrong, right? It's absolute misinformation. And that is filling in gaps that are left by this vacuum in knowing how elections work under the hood. And so having that and showing and incentivizing and supporting election directors in their in this project of explaining to voters how elections work will be the best thing to ward off both complete misinformation from non-official sources or potentially misleading information from official sources. If you know that there's already a post-election audit done by the normal civil servants, you might be less likely to trust the election ninjas audit. Yes, sir.
So you show that people's attitudes are remarkably plastic over the short term, if you show them the right message.
Yeah.
Aren't you worried that those players that have investment in fostering distrust in elections are now going to start, okay, it's going to become a battle of advertisements between those that say trust elections and those that say trust elections?
Well, I think you're absolutely right, but I think currently it's a battle that's only being played on by one side. right? And the number of hits when we go to find these things on YouTube, these things have been watched by fewer people than some of my UCSD TV shows, right? Which is saying a lot or a little, right? And they need to be amplified and they need to be more. Thanks.
We all watch your TV shows.
Yeah.
Thanks very much, Dan. I really appreciate it. Okay, everybody, that concludes our program, and thank you all very much. We've had a very fine year, and I look forward to the next year with all of you, with me as president, Barbara as vice president, and the rest of the team who is here. Thanks very much. Have a good year.
I'll bring that gavel to future meetings. So you can.
But these are yours. Here. I don't want to take it. Okay, thanks very much.
No,
Tanya.
thank you.
We got